started with Venezuela. All right.
Yeah.
So Trump seems get himself into some trouble with this Venezuela whole project because the oil executive pretty clearly said they are not that interested in doing it, right? So what is he going to do? I mean, he created this for himself.
Absolutely, he's going to move on as quickly as he can to the next crisis, because what happened was, I don't know whether you watched it, but we did a program on Monday
Hmm.
with Robert Barnes, who's a U.S. attorney.
Okay.
According to him and
Hmm.
according to them, Trump based everything about Venezuela on the advice of one person, who was Paul Singer, an American billionaire who goes out and buys lots of debt, is a vulture fund person. So he bought up a lot of Venezuela debt, which he wants to now cash in. And he told Trump, well, let's get rid of this man Maduro. I'm your funder. I mean, I should say that he donates a lot to Trump and their friends. And I could tell you, why don't we take over Venezuela and we can sort out the oil? It can all be done very fast and very
Hmm.
quickly, and we can get the oil moving. Then you'll make money, and I'll make money, and
Yeah.
the United States will make money, and all will be well.
Hmm.
And he was the expert, even though he's got no background in the oil industry and knows absolutely nothing about the oil industry. He was the person that Trump was listening to. And then, of course, the actual real experts, the oil industry executives, came along and they told Trump Venezuela is uninvestable.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine who
Hmm.
has contacts, well, who is actually, I would say, a person who works on the periphery of the American intelligence community. He's not on the payroll, but he does contract work for them. Anyway, he said to me very straightforwardly, if Venezuela's oil industry had been, could have been developed in the way that Trump thinks it can be developed, the Chinese would have done it long ago. I mean, they were there. They have all that. They have all the resources and all the
Hmm.
skills. I mean, they would have done it. Um, we wouldn't be in this situation where production in Venezuela has collapsed. Very, very difficult to produce oil in Venezuela, even in the best of times. And these are not the best of times.
No. It's what is interesting is Trump himself said after this whole thing happened, there was a Air Force One. There's lots of people there asking him all kinds of questions. He was in a very good mood because he thought he got a victory.
Yeah.
And he said, I talked to the oil executives before and after. So before sounds to me like he talked to them, but maybe not. Maybe he didn't listen to them, I guess. Here, here's my question. In the past, before they took Maduro, Maduro was open
Yeah.
to open the oil market for US executives, right? US oil companies. But now I'm not so sure Delcy Rodriguez, the current one, she sounds to me like she wants Maduro to be released first. So I don't hear any promises from her at all at this point, right?
There are no promises whatsoever. I've been looking at what the Venezuelans have been saying. They're
Hmm.
saying straightforwardly, if the United States wants to buy oil from us, we're perfectly willing to sell oil to the United States. We always have been. We
Hmm.
were in Hugo Chavez's day when we used to sell oil regularly and routinely to the United States. We were in Nicolas Maduro's time. It was the Americans who stopped our buying our
Hmm.
oil, not we who stopped selling it. And we are absolutely willing to sell it to the Americans today, provided they come. And this is a commercial, an open, free commercial contract negotiated in the proper way at a market price. Now, that is not at all what Trump is thinking, but
Hmm.
that is what the Venezuelans are saying. And that is what the Venezuelan government is saying. And I don't think there's any reason to assume that that is going to change.
Hmm.
Of course, it's not at all what Trump expects. He wants to basically run Venezuela.
Uh,
He wants to relegate Delcy Rodriguez to some
yeah.
kind of a viceroy, or not even that, actually. Put her. in the same position, that the British reduced the Maharajas in India, where they did exactly what the British told them. I mean, that's how he sees it. I mean, it's a straightforward imperial thing. He wants the Venezuelans to give all the oil they have to the United States, not to sell it, to just give it
Hmm.
to the United States. The United States will then sell the oil at
The price.
whichever customers he can find. And then Trump, out of his own kindness and generosity, will share some of
Hmm.
the proceeds, whatever part of the proceeds he considers fair, with the Venezuelans. That is his idea of
Oh.
how this relationship is going to work, which is imperialism
Hmm.
of the most grotesque variety. But that is how he expects it to work. But it is not going to work that way. It cannot work that way. I
Hmm.
mean, this will inevitably trigger huge problems in Venezuela if he persists in it, because it means that the Venezuelans can't sell their own oil. And already the inflation problems in Venezuela are apparently getting worse.
Hmm.
So that is one reason why it won't work. But besides, who in their senses would be willing to buy this oil in the first place?
Hmm.
I mean, it's Venezuela's oil, which the United States is stealing. It's not
Yes.
as if there's a shortage of oil
Yeah.
in the markets. So
Yes.
people are going to be extremely wary of buying oil that has been stolen by the United States in this way, even if people are friendly to the United States. I
Hmm.
mean, they don't want to get themselves into a situation where one day somebody from Venezuela or somebody who has contracts with Venezuela, China, for example,
Hmm.
comes and saying, "Hold on, that's not America's oil to sell or yours to buy. That's our oil." If we're China, we have big contracts for oil from Venezuela. So does India, by the way.
Hmm.
We can absolutely bring legal claims to have that oil back or to have the profits from the oil trade that you're engaging in back. So people are going to steer very clear of this. They're not going to go in there, and I'm sure that the American companies who are wary of going into Venezuela and who don't want to invest billions, hundreds of billions there, know, of course, all of the problems about exploiting the Venezuelan oil fields, but they also know all about the legal problems as well.
That's a good point. I'm just thinking, like, for example, OPEC, right?
Mm.
If I were oil company, American oil company, I do not want to do things that make OPEC very unhappy.
Yeah.
I'm sure what Trump is doing, I don't think the OPEC, even though they don't openly say it, but I don't
No.
think any OPEC member will be particularly happy, right? And if you are the oil company being part of that, I don't think it's a good idea at this point, don't you think? I mean, ExxonMobil, Chevron, these are companies, 100, 150 years old companies. They
Yeah.
must think beyond 2028, right?
Yeah. Exactly. You're completely fine. They're not going to want to do this. If we're talking about the Gulf oil producers, Saudi Arabia,
Hmm.
Qatar, Kuwait, well, they sell oil to China.
Yeah.
They're not going to want to have problems with China or even India.
Hmm.
They also sell oil by stealing oil, because that's what they would be doing
Yeah.
by assisting in the sale, in the
Hmm.
stealing of oil from Venezuela,
Yeah.
which is of course also an OPEC country.
Yeah.
And the oil companies that have to deal every day with these countries are also going to be extremely careful. Of
Yeah.
course, this has never been thought out. Trump never thinks beyond, tomorrow or today even. So I mean, or the next hour or the next minute.
Mhm.
So he's never sat down and thought this through.
Yeah. And then the case against the Maduro, it doesn't seem to me that is that good of a case because you mentioned that this so-called organization that he's supposed to be a head of, a narco organization, doesn't even exist.
Mhm.
That's the most serious accusations, right? And that one falling apart. I don't know about the other, supposedly, crime he committed, like money laundering and illegal assisting weaponry. I mean, I'm not sure any of these are solid case against Maduro.
Well, I'm going to say this. I mean, when I looked at the indictment, I said to me,
Mm.
"Is that it?" I mean, it looked like something that a 20-year-old law student would have written. I mean, it's so thin as to be, I should say, a bad 20-year-old law student might have written. I mean, it's so thin. It's thin to the point of absurdity.
Mhm.
Well, again, we spoke to Robert Barnes, who, remember, is an attorney
Mhm.
in the United States, a very good attorney indeed,
Mhm.
somebody who's argued cases in the Supreme Court of the United States. And he went much further than I've just done,
Mhm.
or indeed than you just did. He said this indictment won't fly.
Mhm.
There is a very real possibility that the court will throw it out.
Yeah.
I mean, they might not even feel that there is enough of a case there to take to trial. And by the way, you're absolutely right to bring up the famous cartel of the sons that Maduro was supposed to be heading. I mean, we have Marco Rubio, who is himself a lawyer, by the way, saying that this wasn't really an abduction or a kidnapping or an act of
Mhm.
war. This is an arrest, according to an arrest warrant.
Yeah.
And he's arrested. They've arrested Maduro and killed all sorts of people. You
Yeah.
remember all those boats
Yeah.
they were blowing up and killing people on it, all on the premise that Maduro was this criminal linchpin, this
Mhm.
gang leader, this head of this cartel, the cartel of the sun. And then the moment he's arrested, they say, "Well, actually, it doesn't even exist. It never existed." So I mean, I mean, I have to say, I found that. I mean, I was absolutely stunned. I mean, that was so bizarre
Mhm.
that you build up this story for weeks. You do all these terrible things for weeks. And then when you've got your man, you simply drop it. You
Yeah.
drop, in other words, what is the heart of your original criminal case.
Mhm.
Because to be clear, the criminal case that they were alleging was that he was the head of this great cocaine cartel,
Mhm.
the cartel of the Suns.
Yeah.
I never believed it. You didn't believe it. Most people didn't believe it. But I mean, to just drop the whole thing almost instantly,
Yeah.
I mean, that makes you look completely ridiculous.
It is. So it'll be interesting if they just throw out the case. What is he going to do?
Well,
Okay.
indeed, what is he going to do? Send him back to Venezuela?
Yeah.
Apologize? Of course not. I
No.
mean, and that's where we come back to the despicable nature
Mhm.
of this whole enterprise. Because what has happened is that the United States has, and Trump, of course, but not just Trump. I mean, there's
Mhm.
a whole group of, they have now enmeshed law and politics, geopolitics, and criminal law. They've entangled them completely with each other, and they can't just they just can't let Maduro go back.
Mhm.
I mean that's impossible. The politics of this make that impossible. So one way or the other, the legal process is going to become deeply contaminated and corrupted by transparently political objectives. I've described this as a show trial, by the way, the kind
Mhm.
of show trials that the Soviet Union used to conduct in the 1930s, which never happened in China. Just to say,
Mhm.
that was never something that happened at any point in China. You could
Mhm.
criticize many things, but never at any point since 1949 did they ever do anything like that. Well, the United States is about to, because that is what this amounts to.
The other thing Trump did is he pulled out of 66 international
Mm, mm,
organizations, and many of them were established by the United States, or
mm.
one of the founding members was the United States. Um, is he trying to, I mean, we talked about this before, so he's pretty much destroy the whole system established after World War II. He's just crushing the whole
Yeah.
thing,
Yes.
blow the whole thing up,
Yes,
right?
you're quite right to make that point too, by the way, because it's a system that the Americans themselves mostly, overwhelmingly
Mhm.
created. They proposed the setting up of the United Nations. They mostly drafted the UN Charter.
Yeah.
They mostly set up all of these international bodies, all of this whole web and system of international law is a product of the work of American jurists before the Second World War.
Hmm.
And very great jurists they were. One has to give them that credit.
Yeah.
And now what's happening is that the country that created the system and whose ideas this system reflects is tearing it up from the bottom up. And the defenders of this system, first and foremost, China. It
Hmm.
is, I mean, China is the big leader
Yeah.
in defending international law today. And of course, Russia.
Hmm. Yeah. So now we are heading back to before World War One, some kind of a jungle system now. Just
What we are heading towards, I think it's quite a jungle.
hmm.
I think it's something a bit more sinister in some ways. What we are heading back to is straightforward 19th century hegemonism and imperialism. This is that. I mean, the thinking, the language that is coming out of Washington today is very close to what, say, the British and the French were saying in the 19th century, even as they went around the world creating their colonial empires, subjugating nations, invading them, overthrowing their governments,
Hmm.
establishing their empires, burning the Summer Palace in Beijing, and doing all of those things.
Okay. Um, that's the international front. But even
Yeah,
domestically,
yeah,
his Justice Department is investigating Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair.
yeah,
That case truly puzzles me because Jerome Powell, as a chair, he's going to leave in May.
yes.
Whatever the problem he has, why does he need to do this? Why can't just wait until May Jerome Powell leaves?
Well, quite absolutely, because the extraordinary thing about this is that there is, in my opinion, a case. I'm not saying that Jerome Powell is guilty. Let me make
Mhm.
that very clear. But there is a case. But wait until the man goes.
Hmm. Hmm.
Don't contaminate it by bringing it now. He's
Hmm.
going in May, as you rightly say. This is not just nakedly political, it's nakedly vindictive.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Mhm.
Again, it is an abuse of law and of the prosecution process.
What he's trying to achieve? I mean, first of all, I'm not even sure the case, whatever the case he's bringing now, can even be done by May. And by May, Jerome Powell will leave as the chair. He will continue to pursue it, and just so that Jerome Powell would be in a lot of trouble, legal trouble, so he could personal vendetta, get it to
Yes,
his enemy. Okay.
yes, I mean it is a personal vendetta. You only have to listen to the way Trump talks increasingly, and he's starting to sound increasingly like Al Capone. I mean, he has the sort of gangster speak all the time, and I have to say it. A lot of his actions are increasingly reflecting this. I mean, to say it frankly, what happened with Maduro also has something of the look of a gangster hit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this attack on Jerome Powell is the same. As I said, there is perhaps an arguable case,
Hmm.
but bringing it in this way calls into question the whole uh, operation. And I can't help but think that Trump is doing it because he simply cannot stand. In fact, he deeply dislikes and hates Jerome Powell. I don't think there's anything more to that.
Hmm.
And, gangsters are like this. And they also believe, perhaps rightly, that if they do this, they will terrorize everyone around them.
Yeah, one thing I'm thinking because the Supreme
Mm,
Court hasn't decided on the tariff case yet. I don't know what
yes.
takes them so long. They were supposed to issue a ruling like before the Christmas, my understanding, but they keep on postponing it. Let's say, if they get a ruling today or tomorrow, supposedly
Yeah.
this time they have another meeting. So is it possible that there's some kind of a message to the Supreme Court justice? If you don't do things my way, I can find ways to harass you or something. I wonder whether there's something to that.
I think there absolutely is. I mean, it would be completely in keeping with
Mm.
everything else that we are now seeing.
Yeah.
I mean, by the way, it's richly ironic because, of course, one of the people who could justifiably claim that he was the target of prosecutorial abuse was Donald J. Trump.
Yeah.
We had all those frankly flimsy cases brought against him by the Biden Justice Department and by various people in New York.
Yeah.
Now he's retaliating by doing the same. Oh, he's doing this, only he's doing this in an even more sinister way as part of a power grab. So I think your theory that this is intended to intimidate the justices of the Supreme Court is quite likely true.
I also think he's frustrated with the debt, the U.S. national debt. Now he blamed Jerome Powell for the interest rate, but actually that's not how the Fed works, right? He should know
Yeah.
that better than that. But it is the problem. The debt, like right now, is $38.3 trillion. The problem is the concerning part is from 36 to 37 trillion. It took about close to 9 months to increase that 1 trillion. But then from 37 to 38 it took 72 days, which is less than 2.5 months. So you see it's accelerating, right? This
Yes.
increase of the debt is
Yes.
accelerating. I think he must feel a little bit almost like a panicking, but he didn't know what to do. So he put all his anger on Jerome Powell. Could
I
it
think
also
that's a
be
very,
that?
that's a very, very good analysis, and I suspect there's something to that. There's a famous expression which I believe is ultimately Russian that we hate those we have wronged.
Yeah.
So he hates Jerome Powell already, and of course he's now blaming Jerome Powell for everything that is going wrong. And when there's a crisis in the debt markets, you say that it was all the fault of Jerome Powell, who was this sinister criminal who found his way onto the Supreme Court and didn't do exactly what Donald Trump wanted. The debt issue is enormous.
Mhm.
It ought to be the single biggest topic that is being discussed in the United States. I mean, bear in mind, you of course remember how when Biden was around, we used to get the Americans used to turn up every so often whenever they needed the Chinese to buy treasury bonds. They used to go to China to
Mhm.
get the Chinese to buy treasury bonds, and the Chinese sometimes would, quite mostly would.
Mhm.
Uh, well, now with an economic war underway between the US and
Yeah.
China, the Chinese are not going to do that. The United States is piling up debt all the time. And of course, the great manufacturing and industrial revival that Trump was talking about is not materializing for all sorts of reasons, which are totally obvious. And if you're not producing anything and your debt is exploding and your creditors, your major creditor is losing patience,
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
course you've got every reason to be worried.
Yeah, I just feel like he's frustrated, right? He's been in office almost a year and he achieved basically nothing. And everything
No,
he tried, like the tariffs war, I mean, he did collect some tariffs, but it's not nearly as enough to
no,
cover anything. And
no.
possibly if he lose the case, he possibly have to pay back. So,
Well, indeed, absolutely. And of course, he's going to make the matter worse
yeah.
because next year he wants to increase the defense budget by a third.
Uh-huh.
Now, that is all about China. Robert Barnes says it's all about trying to generate momentum in the industrial part of the economy. But I think it's mostly about China.
Hmm.
And of course, it's the worst possible thing you can do at this stage in America's economic history because you've got tariffs, and those tariffs in some form are going to remain. We're not going to go back, whatever the Supreme Court decides, to the pre-Trump world. When I mean the
Hmm.
pre-Trump world, I mean the pre-2017 world,
Hmm.
where there was freedom for goods. So there's going to be obstacles to goods coming into the United States. By contrast, what industrial activity there is going to be increasingly diverted towards military production because it's going to be much more profitable for industrial companies to go into military production to build warships and laser beams,
Hmm.
particle beam weapons, and all of that kind of thing. So they will want to do that rather than go in for basic consumer goods because the one is more profitable than the other. So you're going to get fewer imports of goods, less production of consumer goods within the United States than there would otherwise have been. And of course, what that is inevitably going to result in is higher inflation. I
Mhm.
mean, it is the one thing follows naturally from the other. It's going to provide a further upward spike, both to the debt and to the cost of living issues that afflict Americans.
Speaking of the personal vendetta, uh, Trump seems to have a lot of problem with the state of Minnesota, right? So right after the new year, there was this scandal of daycare corruption. But the more I look at it, I'm not sure there's truly huge corruption going on. I'm sure there's something probably irregular or something, but
Mm.
I very much doubt it's that big of a scandal as they
Yes.
you hear they don't talk about that anymore. For a while,
Mm.
everybody was jumping on it, right? Vance was jumping on it, Elon Musk was on it, but they don't talk about that anymore. And then follow that is this ICE shooting a
Yeah.
innocent. I mean, I'm sure you saw the video. It's pretty
Yeah.
clear to me.
Oh,
But Trump and his organization, his administration, they seem to deny the fact that this is an
yes.
innocent woman, isn't it?
Yes, yes, that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, they're smearing the victim. I mean, instead of conducting a proper investigation, holding to the account the people that, did this thing, the people on the ground, admitting that this is all a tragedy, showing any degree of remorse or sorrow. I mean, they are digging in, going on and telling everybody that, they were absolutely right to do what they did, that they've got
Hmm.
nothing to apologize for, and being really very, very horrible about this person. Um, we spoke earlier about how this administration is starting to look like a mafia
Hmm.
operation.
Hmm.
Well, this is
This is
exactly
true.
how gangsters work. I mean, the people get killed in the crossfire.
Hmm.
That's their attitude, and well, so what? It's part of a day's work. I mean, this is almost the tone that they're taking.
Yeah, and and I do think it has something to do with the fact that he actually hates Waltz, governor.
Yeah,
Again, Waltz is not going to run for re-election, so he's
no,
leaving soon also. But Trump seems like once he get his idea about somebody, he just never let it go, it seems like.
yes. Yes, this has been a characteristic of Trump throughout his political and business
Hmm.
career. Apparently, I mean, he's very vindictive and doesn't let grudges drop.
Hmm.
If you get on the wrong side of him,
Yeah.
there's never any coming back, and it's very corrosive and very bad.
Not very helpful.
And a president of the United States
Hmm.
should absolutely not fall into that.
Yeah.
I mean, you have no right to indulge your personal animosities in that way.
Yeah. And then lots of people saying that he's doing all this is to distract what's going on in the Epstein file, which I think
Yeah,
there is some elements to
yeah,
it. But I very much doubt that he could be successful. People haven't forgot
yeah,
Epstein files. It will continue to come back and hunt him. They missed another deadline, which is January 3rd. They're supposed to send a report to, I think, to the whole to the House and Senate probably, just to explain what they have done. They were supposed to release everything on December 19th. They only released the 1%. And it's
yeah,
all a lot of the redactions. The report is supposed to explain what just happened and why do you need to redact all those materials. They haven't done any of that.
yeah.
They totally ignored Congress at this point, right?
Abs- Absolutely, you're completely correct. And by the way, you're absolutely right that people are not forgetting it.
No.
Every day on our threads, many comments that which we know well can't be published appear saying, well, Trump is doing this and Trump is doing that in order to distract from Epstein.
Yeah.
People are perfectly aware of this. They're talking about this all the time. And we had this incident where he confronted this factory worker who abused him,
Hmm.
insulted him to his face, and he did a horrible sign with his hand in
Hmm.
response. I mean, this is dogging him all the time, and it is draining, it's sapping away every day his credibility, and the fact that he's constantly playing for time, that he's so slow to provide this evidence after having promised that he would provide the evidence. All of this is terrible.
There's also some theory I find interesting. Now, I myself am not sure it's true, but I think
Mhm.
it's worth discussing is that there clearly he's doing all kinds of very, very, in our view, very crazy things. But considering Trump is not a dumb guy, he could be very, smart in a lot of ways and cunning, like you said. Is it there is one possibility that so much problem, the Epstein files and the debt problems, and now, of course, the Maduro's debacle, all that kind of thing. Could it be that in the end, in his view, a war will be the solution to all that? And if he cannot get a real war outside US, maybe even the civil war will be okay for him. Is that possible? That him
Well, it
think that?
certainly it is certainly possible, and I mean
Mhm.
this would not be unique in history. I
Okay.
mean there have been many instances where things like that have happened, where leaders who are having problems at home decide that the moment has come to um, distract attention by going for war somewhere else. There is a very widespread view, by the way, that
Mhm.
Hitler did that. That the reason Hitler decided that he needed a war in the summer of 1939 was precisely because he knew that the German economy was out of control, and that unless there was a war, there would be a massive crash, which would probably bring him down.
Mm.
So he probably did that. I mean, I say when I say probably, I mean we don't know for sure, but there is a very respectable and very widespread view within the world of historians that thinks that this was probably a critical part of his motivations.
The outside, foreign wars, but some people think he might even don't mind to have a civil war, within the United States.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Well,
that's,
I think that's possible. I think there's something else to say here, which is, of course, that unfortunately, there are a lot of people in the United States who are looking for a fight
yeah,
also.
yeah,
So this is very combustible, and I think Trump is probably influenced by that too, to some extent.
yeah, yeah. And because fundamentally, like you said about West in general, lots of people believe that the way to solve problems is through violence
Mm.
or a fight of
Yeah.
some kind, right?
Yes.
Through a fight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. They don't have that depth of history
Hmm.
that China does. The extraordinary thing about China is that they learned that this was wrong during the time of the Warring States. If you
Hmm.
read the philosophy of that period, you can see it, and it's become hardwired into Chinese culture and thinking and political theory and philosophy ever since.
Hmm.
And it's that historic memory and knowledge has never been lost. We've never achieved it in the West.
Hmm. Rare earth magnet. So the G7 is get together trying to figure out a way. They come up with a rare earth magnet floor price, which immediately reminds me about this oil price cap. Okay.
Yeah.
What are they doing? They really think they can control the rare earth price? Are they
Well, I mean,
serious?
they're well, quite absolutely. Well, you see, this is the trouble. They probably are. This is the sort of people that we are talking about are people who have no experience. I cannot emphasize this too strongly. No experience at all of the production process. I mean, it's
Mhm.
just not something that they've ever been involved in, and of supply chains and the complexity of supply chains or any of that. This is why all of the attempts to try and get production
Mhm.
increase of anything in the United States and, by the way, in Europe has been so unsuccessful. But they are very familiar with financial markets, and
Mhm.
they know that financial markets can be to a great extent controlled, and that you can control prices there to your own to your own interests, and they think that they can do the same thing. And of course, they are absolutely set. I mean, they are laughably wrong.
I just feel like they always they focus so much on the other side instead
Yeah.
of themselves, right? So
Yes.
if your problem is you need stable supply of rare earth. Well, you don't need to do anything or say anything to upset China. That's it. Right? Why isn't that the very easy way out?
There is the Chinese person again speaking. That's the Chinese person speaking. Absolutely, you take the pragmatic, realistic side. You say, well, for the moment at least, the Chinese know how to do this. They have the comparative advantage. That advantage is going to continue for a very long time, at least 10 years, perhaps 20. Um, you know, the Chinese have never up to now abused this
Yeah.
uh, because they haven't. I mean,
Hmm.
there's never been any problems with the West acquiring rare earths in the past. So, why pick a fight with them?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do this? By the way, you could say the same about the Russians. I mean,
Hmm. Yeah.
if you're Europe, you import your gas from Russia.
Yeah.
Instead of getting worked up about this dangerous dependency on the Russians, say to yourself, this gives you a comparative advantage. It makes your industries uh, competitive because the gas is cheap.
Hmm.
And so the best thing to do is to treasure
Hmm.
this relationship and build upon it. Also, because the Russians before 2022 never gave any sign or indication that they were going to use it politically and never abused it in any particular way. But of course, we in the West, we don't think in that way. And we say to ourselves, well, we mustn't let them control us and have leverage over us, even though the whole issue of leverage is a purely Western
Yeah.
concept anyway.
Hmm.
I mean, we've discussed this many times. China talks about win-win,
Hmm.
not about leverage. It's a completely different outlook and way of thinking. But we think always in terms of leverage. So we say, well, the Chinese have some leverage over us, over rare earths. So we must find some way to hit back.
Hmm.
So we control the price. We pick quarrels with them, and then horror upon horror, we
Hmm.
find that suddenly they become less willing to supply us with rare earths, and the whole thing becomes circular and self-reinforcing, and it doesn't solve your problem. China has never attempted to prevent any Western country
Hmm.
from developing the refining capabilities for rare earths. It's not China's fault that
Yeah.
the United States, Canada, the Europeans didn't do this.
Uh-huh.
I mean, China didn't tell them stop refining rare earths, so that we are the only people who can do that, and have worked hard to do it and to develop these skills and knowledge about how to do this thing. So if you are unhappy about the fact that it's only China that can do it, fine. Keep a
Hmm.
good relationship with China, import their rare earths, develop your own rare earth um, refining industry, put in the money, invest over 20 years, and you'll be there. But you don't need to pick quarrels with the Chinese in the meantime. But no Westerner ever thinks this way, because we're always about leverage and comparative advantage and power. And that is how we see the world.
But can they think a little bit longer term, a bigger picture? Because let's say oil or gas, okay, you don't want to rely on the Russian gas.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Europe doesn't have enough natural gas itself. It will have to rely on somebody else. For example, the US, which is way more expensive. And
Yeah.
plus, may I say, US is not that reliable either. Now,
Mm.
US want to get to Greenland, clearly
Mm.
very hostile towards the Europeans. What makes them think that they can be independent, fully independent, right? They have to rely on someone.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, the natural gas export industry from Russia to Europe began in the 1960s,
Hmm.
and it was frictionless and stable
Yeah, yeah.
throughout that time. Europe has transferred entirely to American gas
Hmm.
over the last 4 years.
Yeah,
And already we see what's happening. The Americans are coming after Greenland
yeah.
and are making all kinds of demands about European energy policy and every kind of policy. I mean, they're behaving exactly as the Russians are supposed to have behaved, but never did.
Hmm.
Now, I happen to think that over-reliance on one form of energy is always a bad idea. I
Hmm.
mean, putting aside what the Russians might have intended,
Yeah.
I mean, you might ask yourself, well, we've only got one supplier. Is that really a healthy thing? Or
Hmm.
we got an over dominant supplier? What if there's a political crisis there, as there's been in the past? What if they start to run short of gas, as they might do?
Yeah.
Why not develop alternative forms of energy,
Yeah.
nuclear energy, electric power, all of these things? Absolutely. The Russians have never tried to prevent you from doing it. So why not just do it?
Hmm.
Why again pick quarrels, look for battles, and as you absolutely correctly say, never ask the question of what will happen the next day
Yeah.
when the gas is no longer there, and you find that your factories are closing and your people are getting out of work and your industries are losing competitiveness. But of course, we never do that in Europe because
Yeah.
we always see things very, very short term. I'm sure you've heard the story that Kissinger once said that he spoke to Zhou Enlai
Hmm.
and they talked about um, well, Kissinger said, what do you think of the French Revolution? And Zhou Enlai said, it's too early to tell. It's not actually
No.
quite correct. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a misunderstanding. There was a misunderstanding. I thought Zhou Enlai thought he was talking about the Paris riots of
Uh-huh.
1968, not the French Revolution
Mhm.
of 1789. But it may be wrong factually, but it does speak to a deeper truth that the Chinese do think and plan long term.
Mhm.
I've discovered recently that China began to get on top of the issue of rare earths. It started to develop work on its refining industry way back in the 1960s.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. They do a lot of planning ahead. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and then regarding the rare earth, so what they're trying, the G7 is trying to do, and Besson in particular, really pushing for like they need to set up some system themselves together, I guess, to replace the Chinese rare earth. But have they even thought about this idea? You have so many countries involved. Isn't that itself could be a problem because one of the countries encounter any problem, the whole thing will collapse.
It's an absolute nightmare to do it that way, if I could quickly say. I've never heard of a project which involves so many different players succeeding. I mean, it is all but impossible. You're going to have arguments and competitions and quarrels about which direction to take. It's a certainty that that is going to happen. I mean, what you need is unified central management long term of a carefully structured and planned project.
Mhm. Yeah. But they're not capable of doing
No,
that. I mean,
no,
they
no,
just panic now because China has this dominance and they figure they need to do something. Like we talk so many times, when you don't know what you need to do, don't do anything, you know. But they like to jump
absolutely.
around to do
Well,
things.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're very hysterical, and through their hysteria, unfortunately, the thing about hysteria is it's very infectious,
Uh-huh.
and it infects others, and you
Uh-huh.
end up with this huge, big, unstable group of people for all your different countries all together, feverishly working with each other to try to develop something, and very soon, within a year,
Mhm.
probably even sooner than that, you start to see that they're all working at cross purposes with each other. Japan, by the way, did try
Mhm.
15 years ago to try to crack rare earths,
Mhm.
and they've made minimal progress in
Mhm.
that time.
Yeah.
And Japan um, does do a certain degree of planning, not as much as China does.
Mhm.
And of course, they're a high technology industrial power, in some ways more than the United States is. You should learn from that experience
Yeah.
and realize what a long, slow, incremental process this is. By the way, worth pointing out that in the 1960s, when China started to plan and work on rare earths, it was still a very poor country
Mhm.
by Western standards.
Yeah, but they already realized that China has a lot of rare earth
Mm,
itself, and they want
yeah.
to see if they could do something, yeah. So they put
They
in
had
effort. Yeah.
they had the foresight and they
Mhm.
understood how important these things were. Um, just saying.
Yeah, they do. I do say that they do plan a lot ahead of
Yeah,
time. The same thing with the electricity is it doesn't just generate overnight.
no,
China produces like a trillion megawatts,
yeah,
something. This outrageous number of, I think one third of world electricity now is produced in
yeah,
China. It is also a long time planning. They have been doing
yes,
this, for years to lay out the plans.
yes,
Yeah, and there were times that people would even criticize certain roads, like, why do you build the roads here? There's no car here. Well,
mm,
in a few years' time, you see more cars, and then before you know it, it's very
yes,
jammed even. So,
yes.
yeah.
But that is called planning,
Hmm.
and planning is not just something that we are not so good at in the West. It's now something that we have an ideological aversion to. I
Hmm.
mean, again, I think our Chinese viewers need to perhaps realize that, contrary to what many people believe, the West is much more ideological
Yeah,
than China is.
I think so.
China is very pragmatic about the way it does things. In
Hmm.
the West, we are not.
Hmm.
I mean, the idea is that you leave it all to the spontaneous work of free enterprise.
Hmm.
Is for many people here almost a religious belief,
Yeah.
and one that you really cannot argue against. So you build roads
Hmm.
where the market directs you.
Yeah.
It's all supply and demand. Whereas in China, it isn't like that. They say, well, maybe we don't have the demand for the roads there today,
Huh?
but in 30 years' time, maybe we will need to have the roads there. So build them now and build up the infrastructure. So when we get to the point where we can develop what we need to develop there, we have the infrastructure ready. That's not what the West does.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, he's now visiting China. So
Mm,
ever since Meng Wanzhou, I think the two countries have some pretty bad relationship, which is very
mm,
unfortunate because of all the Western countries. I think China probably has almost the best relationship with Canada for
mm.
many, many years.
Yeah.
And with that one incident, Justin Trudeau pretty much destroyed that. So I'm
Yes.
glad to see that it's resuming.
Yeah.
But what is your view on this?
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, I remember what was his name, Patrice, the previous Prime Minister, Liberal Prime Minister um, before
Trudeau's
Justin
father?
chose.
Pierre
Yes,
Pierre
no, not
Trudeau.
just no. There was another one who
Oh,
was
okay.
anyway, whatever. But
Uh-huh.
Canada absolutely developed very good friendly relations with China. And if
Hmm.
you're talking about Pierre Trudeau,
Hmm.
back in the 70s, I mean, he was absolutely somebody who even then wanted a good relationship with China. And those are the days when Canada did pursue an independent foreign policy, which, by the way, was very highly regarded around the world.
Hmm.
I mean, Canadian diplomacy at one time was considered outstanding.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the Canadians were right at the forefront of it, and Canada was one of the most popular countries
Hmm.
in the world.
Yeah.
Now, it was all wrecked, it was all thrown to pieces. Michael Carney, I mean, he's going to have an enormous job
Hmm.
trying to put it all together again. And he might not be able to,
Hmm.
not because the Chinese, I think, um, are not prepared to let bygones be bygones.
Hmm.
Probably they are,
Hmm.
but because the forces in Canada that propelled Canada into this conflict with China are very strong.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and there is even an article, I forgot which one of the major Canadian newspapers. There was somebody even wrote an article basically telling people, okay, US is still our ally, China is still our enemy or something. But what's
Yeah,
interesting is if you read the comment section, people are just saying, no, China never claimed that Canada is part of China.
yeah,
US
yeah,
did, Trump
yes,
did.
yes, yes,
So
correct.
there's a disconnection, I think.
Yes, yes. Unfortunately, this is all getting mixed up now with the anti-Russian, pro-Ukrainian
Uh,
sentiment. So i- those people who are articulating that inside Canada want to lean towards the United
Hmm.
States
Yeah.
because they see the United States as necessary to enable Ukraine to fight and maybe even win its war
Hmm.
against Russia.
Hmm.
So unfortunately, it's all getting more mixed up with all of these different things, which have nothing to do with China at all.
Oh, okay. But because they think China is helping Russia, right? So China must be bad for that reason
It's
alone. Yeah.
partly for that, but it's more
Hmm.
important. It's America is helping Ukraine,
Uh-huh.
so we
Okay.
must be on the side of the Americans against China because
Uh,
if we are not, then that might mean that the Americans will get angry with us, and they might decide that they mustn't support Ukraine so much anymore.
The other thing is, lots of people in China paid attention to New York Times had an interview with Trump. Now, what was interesting was the New York Times was asking Trump, okay, when you basically kidnap another country's leader, Maduro, isn't that a bad precedent, right? So China now can do something similar to Taiwan, and of course, the Russian can also do something. In particular about the Taiwan, what's interesting was his answer. He was like, no, 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 it's not the same thing because there's not a whole bunch of, illegal people pouring into China or drugs pouring into China. So it's not the same, situation. But then he said something like, Taiwan is very important for Xi Jinping. He's very proud of that and see it as a part of China. But I told him I prefer you not to take it during my time. Maybe when there's a change of president, he would do that. Sounds to me like he already gave up.
Yeah,
The only thing that Xi Jinping promised him is not do it during his time.
well, my impression reading was that Xi Jinping made no promises at
No.
all. I have to say, if such a conversation actually ever took place,
Hmm.
which I very much doubt, but
Yeah.
if it did, Xi Jinping must have told himself, well, I have to humor this idiot because it's a grotesque conversation. Please take Taiwan, that please don't do it in my time. I mean, what kind of a statement is that from the president of the United States to the president of China? I mean, as if any such conversation like that took place, Xi Jinping, who plays extremely good poker, by the way, he's
Mhm.
very, very good at keeping, calm and steady. But he must have said to himself, this is just crazy. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd. But you're absolutely right. I mean, clear that Donald Trump doesn't care about Taiwan. What he cares about ultimately is about Donald Trump. He
Mhm.
knows perfectly well that Taiwan is going to end up rejoining China. Well, I
Mhm.
say rejoining China, um,
Unified.
accepting the authority of the government in Beijing, which is the government of China. In other words, returning to constitutional uh, and legal normality.
Mhm.
He knows that eventually is going to happen,
Mhm.
but he doesn't want it to happen when he's president because he doesn't want to have to make the difficult decisions and the embarrassing decisions that he would be faced with. He will be faced with when it does. So you're quite right.
In that case, it almost feels like right now China has the Taiwan card, right?
Yeah,
Because China can take Taiwan whenever China chose to. I mean, the latest the drill, they have drones that just right outside the tallest building in Taipei.
yeah,
And that, the distance, they could even see through the building. I mean,
yeah.
China was that close to. So, in any event, since this will be an embarrassment for whoever is the president of US when China does that, so it's almost like, okay, I'm not taking it now just so, to be nice to you. But if you really upset me, I will. So it seems to me like China has the leverage now regarding
You
Taiwan.
you are completely correct, and that is, by the way, what Xi Jinping will also have been thinking to himself, because from Trump's side, you said a surrender, which is true, but it's an
Mhm.
abdication. Actually,
Yeah.
it's an abdication of responsibility. He's the
Mhm.
president of the United States. He has to consider the U.S. position. If he understands that that is inevitable,
Mhm.
given the importance of the relationship between China and the United States, he ought to be having an honest conversation with people in the United States about this issue. And he ought to be talking to Xi Jinping, a meaningful conversation, a conversation which would be doing an awful lot of good.
Mhm.
he would come along and say to Xi Jinping, look, I understand completely. Taiwan is part of China. One day it must return to your control. So, what I see my task as is to facilitate this process so that it can take place in a proper, lawful, and orderly way. One which does not involve conflict, which would be a conflict between Chinese people, by the way, just to say,
Hmm.
and which will not involve a wider conflict between my country, the United States, and China.
Hmm. Yeah.
Now, if Trump said that to Xi Jinping would say to himself, "Well, this is a leader I can work with."
Yeah.
Then, as I said, we would have a completely different conversation. But the kind of conversation that Trump says he had with Xi Jinping, as I said, has it has a mad quality.
Hmm. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the Iranian situation.
Mm.
First of all, I have to say, I feel like the Western report about this is very dishonest. It shows us a demonstration within Iran, but they have to actually, it has gone, it's not nearly as many people as they claim, and it's getting fewer and fewer. And then they have to recycle, they have to use the previous demonstration to show, oh, this has just happened. I mean, it's just so bad in terms of, to make it look more than it is, right? Isn't it?
Sophia, you're absolutely right, and I've seen this happen time and time and time again. And you're absolutely correct. I mean, it's there's a huge amount of atrocity propaganda up there, complete malinformation. As you rightly say, recycled stories, some of them from years ago, and it gives a completely distorted picture. But it reminded me very much of what happened in Beijing in 1989.
Yeah. Hmm.
Again,
Yeah.
we had all those extraordinary stories, massive suppression, incredible violence, tens of thousands of people killed, none of which was true.
Yeah.
Absolutely none of which was true, as is now
Hmm.
accepted by academic opinion in the West,
Hmm.
and something which many people in China probably don't know, and which you will never see mentioned today. But I was, of course, there. I was listening to I was watching the broadcasts, I was reading the newspapers for a whole week, after the authorities cleared the
Hmm.
square. We had stories in the media every day, every night, hour after night, describing battles between
Hmm.
different units of the Chinese army,
Hmm. Hmm.
which were supposedly fighting each other in Beijing. This went on for about 7 days. It
Hmm.
was all absolute nonsense. I remember that my brother and I were exchanging messages at the time about it. You remember the internet didn't
Hmm.
exist then, but we were calling each other. We were saying, this is all nonsense. How can people believe this absurdity? And then suddenly, after about 7 days, the whole thing, and when it came to be understood that these attempts to try to provoke conflict inside China
Hmm.
were not working,
Hmm.
that whole story was switched off. I
Yeah.
mean, just completely switched off, and it has never been mentioned again. And you want another example? The recent riots, I call them that, in Hong Kong.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
exactly the same.
Hmm.
The entire population of Hong Kong rising against China, the peaceful protesters, who were, as we both know, not peaceful at all, the authorities acting in a brutal and heavy handed way, when on the contrary, they exercised astonishing
Hmm.
restraint. Uh, but it's exactly the same story about Iran, and it gives a completely distorted picture of the actual situation there.
One thing I noticed, they are very skillful doing these kind of things. So there's a simple example. One time there was a truck discovered somewhere in Britain, and there were 40 people in that truck that killed because there was no window or anything. So
That's
those
right.
people, I guess, they were running away from. At the very beginning, they reported that these are Chinese running away from China, blah blah.
Yeah.
Turns out these are Vietnamese using fake Chinese passports. So that's what happened. But this
Yeah.
whole story in the very beginning, it was every day, first thing they talk about in the morning. I was driving a car and it's always in my car, radio, it's always and talking about these Chinese citizens and blah, blah. The moment they discovered these are the Vietnamese people, I don't hear them anymore. They no
Absolutely.
longer report about this
No,
anymore.
you're completely right. I mean, I remember the story very, very well. And by the way, what you said about that incident and the way that the media switched it off is there are people in Britain who noticed it at the time and commented about this. But you're quite correct. They're very sophisticated at this sort of thing. They do this all the time. And I mean, it was a terrible, terrible business, but it was all manipulated and distorted to foster a completely phony
Mhm.
narrative, which was intended to injure China.
Yeah. But regarding the Hong Kong issue, that's when I decided this is, I always had my suspicion about the West, and I think for me, that's the moment, like, that's it. This is
Yes,
just simply not going to work. I mean, this is just too much. That's when I started paying attention to social media, to,
yes,
self media.
yes,
I pretty much stopped trusting the mainstream. And I do think lots of people did that around that time. This was 2019. And
yes.
then a lot of people gradually they do themselves. So after a couple of years, I started doing it myself, mainly because it started in 2019. That's when I even paying attention
Mm.
to geopolitics, like because there's so many lies. It was like,
Yes,
what are they saying? It's just
yeah.
so,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. But you're absolutely right. They are very, very skilled at this. They're
Mhm.
very experienced at this, and of course, they know what they're doing.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
Yeah.
this is not people getting it wrong and making mistakes. I
Mhm.
mean, these are clear destabilization campaigns.
Yeah.
You saw that in Hong Kong. And by
Right.
the way, the other thing the British do is that they always, whenever there are whenever they report protests in Hong Kong, they bring up this completely untrue story that China is violating promises it made to Britain when Hong Kong transferred back to China. I mean, again, they're
Mhm.
never specific about what these promises were.
Yeah.
They will never provide you with the text
Uh-huh.
of any agreement that was signed
Mhm.
at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, just look out for it in future. They
Mhm.
never do that,
Mhm.
but always, as night follows day,
Mhm.
they will say it, and they will repeat it in criticisms of China that they
Mhm.
make. How can we trust China?
Uh-huh.
It didn't fulfill its promises over
Mhm.
Hong Kong. As
Yeah.
I said, what those promises even were, always left vague.
Yeah. But the reality, my understanding, actually, the Iranian, actually, yes, there are people who are unhappy, but there were plenty of people actually demonstrating to support the government. Of course, they
Yes.
never report
Yeah.
on that.
No.
And the other thing is interesting is the Starlink now being jammed in Iran. So apparently that's something they were unprepared. The Europeans and Americans are like a shock that the Starlink could
Yes.
be jammed. So that's I find interesting. Do you think they will still continue to really having a war with Iran?
Right. Well, the first thing to say is that the jamming of the Starlink has been a profound shock to them. I mean, I'm going to be quite cynical here, and not cynical. I mean, what I know is true. They, I mean, these protests were to a great extent organized from outside. They were organized in Washington,
Mhm.
in Jerusalem, in London. Um, they knew that the Iranian authorities would try to control the internet because everybody does that nowadays. So they tried to undermine that by smuggling in large numbers of Starlink terminals.
Mhm.
And they believe that Starlink is unjammable. It turned out otherwise. And there is a lot of discussion, I know, about who provided Iran with that capability.
Mhm.
Forbes said it was the Russians.
Mhm.
I had an email from somebody I know who is very, very well informed about these things and said it was actually the Chinese.
Hmm.
Both the Chinese and the Russians
Yeah.
have developed this technology, this skill independently of each other. But it was the Chinese who helped the Iranians in this particular case. I don't know which it was, just to say.
Hmm.
But this has been a major shock. And if you know how to track the comments of Western leaders, especially Trump, by the way,
Hmm.
and you follow their words, you look at the kind of comments that Elon Musk made, you could see their shock and their dismay. I mean, this was supposed to be a kill switch that they
Uh-huh.
would be able to
Yeah.
pull, and they're just incredulous that it was taken from them. Now, to answer your question, I'm afraid I am absolutely sure that there will be an attack on Iran.
Hmm.
Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week. Sooner or later this year, the attack will come, because it's been absolutely clear to me ever since June, when there was that 12-day war between Israel, the United States, and Iran, that the objective of the Western powers, of the Americans, is to overthrow the government of Iran. They weren't able to achieve it in June. They failed with this protest movement. Sooner or later, they're bound to try again.
It's interesting, this guy. I never heard this guy, but apparently Reza Pahlavi. So he's
Pavlov.
the Shah's son, right? So
Mm.
they call him the Crown Prince. So he's the Crown Prince. But anyway, so he wrote an article in the Washington Post. He said that Iran is ready for democratic transition. Sounds to me he will be their guy. They're going to reinstall
Yeah,
him.
yeah.
He never been to Iran.
Yes. Well, not only has he never been to Iran, if you know anything at all about Iran, which I do, by the way, I should explain that Greeks and Iranians know each other very well. We're not far away countries,
Mhm.
and we have an awful lot of history that brings us together. I mean, we're very, very closely involved with each other. And I remember the Shah very well, for
Mhm.
example. Anyway, anybody who knows anything about Iran today would know how ludicrous the idea of bringing this person back and making him the king of Iran all over again actually is. I mean, only the Americans and the British would be stupid enough to come up with something like that.
Call him the Crown Prince. I find that's
Crown Prince, I know,
fascinating. Crown
I
Prince.
know.
Yeah. Turkey also very eager to join this alliance between Saudi and Pakistan.
Yeah.
They seem to trying to put together some kind of an Islamic NATO. What is your view on this? Why is Turkey so eager to do that?
Right. Well, the reason probably is that it has a certain rivalry with Saudi Arabia, and it doesn't want a Pakistan Saudi axis
Okay.
amongst the Arab and Muslim states. I mean, Turkey historically saw itself as the leader of Sunni Islam.
Okay.
Saudi Arabia sees itself as the
Uh-huh.
leader of Sunni Islam. Pakistan is the biggest Muslim country, I think, with the biggest. I think it's still bigger than Indonesia is,
Nigeria. Uh-huh.
and of course it's got nuclear weapons, so it's a big,
Hmm.
powerful country. So you don't want the Saudis and the Pakistanis potentially forming a bloc
Okay.
against Turkey. So I think this is probably what it's all about. Having said that, it's something to be welcomed, I would say,
Hmm.
because I don't think it would be a Islamic NATO.
Hmm.
Rather, it's a structure that would be competitive with the security structures that the United States itself has been creating. So Saudi Arabia has historically been very, very much an American ally. In fact, not just an ally, I mean, more than an ally in some ways. But Saudi Arabia, aligning itself with Turkey and Pakistan, starts to be in a stronger position relative to the Americans. And of course, Pakistan, very close relations with China. Inconceivable, by the way, that Pakistan would ever join an anti-Chinese
Hmm.
alliance. I
Hmm.
mean, if you know, and again, anything about Pakistan, if you have had any contacts, dealings with Pakistanis, you would know how impossible that was.
Yeah. Yeah. I know some Pakistanis. Yeah. They're
Yeah,
very, very friendly to Chinese. Yes, absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah. About the Greenland, what's interesting to me is that Trump seems to spearheaded, really want to do this, but there are more and more voices within the United States, it seems to me, are questioning this whole thing. So Sullivan, for example, very clearly said that Trump's excuse or the reasons he wants Greenland, like military bases or natural resources, rare earth, what have you, all these things we can do now. We don't need to take Greenland to do so. So he's very much against taking it like that. That Sullivan probably among the smarter ones, I would say. He sees
Mm,
things a little bit better than people like Trump and even probably better than Biden in a lot of ways.
mm.
So not only him, but there are people in the Congress, including some Republicans, are raising their concerns about this whole thing. So what do you think of that?
Well, I think they're absolutely right too, and I think this is another crazy plan. But I'm afraid I think Trump is absolutely committed to it. And I'm going to, if I was a gambling man, which I'm not, my money would be on he's seizing Greenland sometime this year.
Hmm.
And I'm going to say something else. I think that if the Danes offered to sell it to Trump, I think he would be less than happy. I think there is an impulse in him that actually wants to just take it.
Uh-huh.
And I would not be surprised if that's what he does. He doesn't like the Europeans. He
Hmm.
absolutely doesn't like the Danes for all kinds of reasons. I mean, probably in his own mind. He's got himself hooked on this idea that Greenland is this enormously important place
Hmm.
that will, secure his legacy if he takes it over for the United States. He's provided no coherent reason why the United States needs Greenland. Uh, Probably the rare earths there are not there in anything like the quantity that he imagines. It is much smaller than he believes.
Hmm.
Some people say that he's looking at the wrong maps. The maps that make Greenland look enormous and South America look very small, whereas in fact Greenland is only a fraction the size of South America. So anyway, he's nowhere near as big as he thinks. It is not going to give the United States a dominant position in the Arctic. The United States is in the Arctic.
Hmm.
It borders on the Arctic through Alaska.
Hmm.
It's not going to strengthen, improve the position of the United States in any way. The people of Greenland don't want to be made part of the United States.
Hmm.
It is an extraordinarily brutal act to make against a country, Denmark,
Hmm.
which has been an intensely loyal ally of the United States and which is, of course, a NATO ally. But I think he wants to do it. I think if Venezuela goes wrong and Iran looks difficult, probably he will do Greenland sooner. I've heard stories that he wants it done before the 4th of July.
Hmm. Okay, using that as something to
Yeah,
celebrate 4th of July.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But realistically, I do think if he wants to do that, he probably need to do it before the midterm election because
I,
after the election, a lot of things can happen.
absolutely.
The Democrats,
Absolutely.
even himself is saying the Democrats, if they got the control of the majority of both the House and Senate, they might impeach him again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. But this time, I do think they probably have some ground to impeach him. In the
Yeah.
previous times, I thought that was just a party play. But this time, he does have a lot of problems that I think are, you can say, impeachable.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I mean, I think he's done lots of things. I mean,
Mhm.
the abuse of prosecutor,
Yeah.
the Justice Department, the prosecutorial power that we were talking about is one.
Yeah.
The Maduro kidnapping is
Yes.
another, and
Mhm.
there's all kinds of things that he's been up to.
Yeah. Okay. Russia and Ukraine. So recently, there has been some pretty heavy bombing, right? The Russians have done on Ukraine, and I just saw Lavrov said that the current talk about the ceasefire is just not very serious.
Yeah,
So everything is now back to the battleground now, battlefield.
pretty much.
Okay.
The fundamental problem is that the Americans are not, and the Americans are not prepared to make the concessions to the Russians that would be needed to end the war. They're
Hmm.
not prepared to address the overriding Russian security
Hmm.
concerns,
Hmm.
NATO expansion,
Yeah.
um, the issue of Ukraine itself and its future, which the Russians are absolutely prioritizing. The Europeans still see Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, is essential in order to keep the Americans involved in Europe and to keep the Russians at bay. I mean, the fact that the Russians are not threatening any country in
Hmm.
Europe apart from Ukraine itself,
Hmm.
and have made it very clear that they have no intention of threatening any other country in Europe, whereas the Americans are coming and are seizing Greenland.
Yeah.
This still hasn't altered in any way the obsession that the Europeans have with Russia and with trying to keep the Americans committed to the defense of Europe. And the Ukrainians themselves are apparently unable to move forward with negotiations. Over the course of this program, the program we've just done, I do wonder whether this isn't the moment for the Chinese representative, diplomat, what was his
Hmm.
name, the peace envoy. Um,
Envoy, yeah. Hmm.
yes, to actually maybe this is the moment for him to go to Kiev and
Okay.
to say to them, well, look at the situation you are in. The Americans aren't helping you. The
Hmm.
Europeans cannot help you. The Russians are hammering you to pieces. Your army is falling apart. You've still got a little time, but
Hmm.
the amount of time you have is shrinking. We are here. We want to help you. Listen to us finally, and we will help you. We will help you do a deal with the Russians. I mean, that might actually work. It would annoy the Americans incredibly. I mean, Trump would be furious that he's not lost any possible chance of getting his Nobel Prize. But if your real concern is peace in Ukraine, then perhaps that's the only way.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think the Ukraine want to listen to China. I
No.
still get that feeling. Yeah.
They
But
were they were unbelievably rude
yeah.
about China
Uh-huh.
at one point in
Mm.
ways that I found deeply upsetting.
Yeah.
Actually,
Hmm. Yeah, actually, I think they totally misunderstood China because the Chinese people and the government has a lot of good feelings towards Ukraine. They
yeah,
don't after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were a lot of Ukrainian engineers. They helped China a lot.
yeah,
So I people in China do remember these things, right?
yeah,
The way they remember fondly about what Greece did when they got their first aircraft carrier. Those sort of things. People
yeah,
talk about that a lot, but I don't think Ukraine just
yeah.
believe, okay, you just on the Russian side. It's not that simple. There are lots of
No,
people in China do not want to see Ukraine continue to suffer. I don't think they
exactly.
understand that.
No.
But and regarding Trump, why do you think he's so obsessed about this Nobel Peace Prize? Is it because of beef with Obama? Is
Yes,
that it?
I think it's purely that actually. I think the specific issue of the Nobel Prize, he has this enormously rivalrous attitude towards Obama.
Okay.
Remember, the first inauguration, he was trying to make out that the crowd that came to see him being inaugurated was bigger than the one Obama had. He has an obsession with this issue, and it diminishes him. I mean, it makes him seem ridiculous ultimately. But I think that is right. I think that's all it is, actually.
It's so incredibly childish, juvenile that
Yes.
he sometimes
Yes.
behaves. Yeah. But
Well, again, I saw Trump with Xi Jinping
mhm.
in South Korea. I think it was in December. Was it December or November?
November probably. Uh-huh.
November.
Maybe December.
And I mean, he did look childish.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you could see Xi Jinping was like this patient adult
Mhm. Yeah.
who is, trying to remain calm in the face of this foolish child. There is something very childlike about Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. But the danger thing is that he's very childish, very immature in a lot of ways, but he controls a lot of power, right?
Yes,
Including lots of nuclear weapons, and that's
yes.
make it very unsettling, I think.
Absolutely. He's
Yeah.
impulsive, he's
Mhm.
volatile, he's childish in his reactions,
Yeah.
and he throws tantrums,
Yeah.
and like a spoiled child, smashes the furniture.
Yeah. Yep. Let's see next week what happens. There's just something happens every day now.
Of course it does. Whatever one may say, we are indeed living in interesting times. Just to say,
All right. So let's talk next week. Thank you so much.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.